Good afternoon, everybody. We seem to be about 3 minutes after the hour. We'll wait a little bit longer. Melissa cannot join us today. She's traveling, I believe. We have a large number of participants already, 48. Good heavens. And let's declare attendance victory at this point and proceed. So next slide. Welcome everybody to the all hands meeting of CD2H. This is an overview, among other things, of the phase 3 process. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Chris Shute. I'm one of the co-PIs. And I think in this process, should not be unknown to you. CD2H throughout its history has requested the community to recommend projects as part of our engagement process, to have a bottom-up, if you will, approach to issues and topics of interest to the CTSA hub members, informatics cores, and related folk. And so we're asking them for something on the order of a 6-month project to help coordinate and implement or develop something of informatics interest to the CTSA program. The 6-month issue was an administrative task, frankly. We know that most projects don't neatly fit into 6-month intervals, so it can be longer than that. But for accountability purposes, and I think it is incumbent upon CD2H to ensure not only the perception, but the reality of accountability to our constituents. That means that projects have to be able to deliver something within the 6-month time frame, so that I think we can justify the investment and the support. We anticipate in this round to have up to 3 projects per core, depending obviously on their parameters, and that these submissions will be publicly available for community comment, which I think is again important to the currency of and our transparency. It says the selection will be overseen by the IDTF leads. That obviously is apocryphal. It will be the IEC, for those of you that have been doing other important things. The IDTF was renamed the Informatics Enterprise Committee. Don't ask, it's a long story. But anyhow, that group will be among the reviewers. They are our peers and colleagues elected by the CTSA informatics sites, and I think are a good cross-section of representation and sort of a representative republic for the CTSA sites themselves. The CD2H steering committee, obviously, our community core co-chairs, who are very important, the CLIC PI, the PI focus member group, and of course, NCATS. This was originally due on the 9th, but has been extended through the 16th. Questions, comments, updates, corrections on this overview slide? Then let's move to the next slide. We had some hiccups with this, but we are using the grant competition software that NewCats had developed and that CTSA is promoting. I think it was useful to shake down some things. It appears to be working quite well now. For those of you that have not had access to the URL for some reason, here it is. But again, we welcome applications from the community writ large. Next slide. And part of the secret sauce for doing that is you have to decide when you enter this how to authenticate yourself. NIH over the past couple of years under Ken Gersting's leadership and others, I know Dave, you contributed to this, has been working very hard to have a federated authentication mechanism, sort of like the InCommon Federation, but more broadly based and inclusive of NIH. So when you enter this proposal submission, if you are representing a CTSA, we advise that you enter as an organization. Many of us, of course, have NIH credentials through NIH ERA Commons or other sources, but it's best not to use that for this purpose, but to go in as your home organization. When you do, you'll be asked to, in a drop-down box, to name what your research organization actually is, and then you fill in what that might be, and they're pretty good at partial name recognition for ensuring that we can, if you're a CTSA, then you will be in this list. That's absolutely guaranteed. Questions or comments? Fair enough. Let's move on. The criteria for selecting these projects are not terribly surprising. They're at some level motherhood and apple pie. We try to establish, and in partnership with IEC and indeed NCATS, we tried to establish reasonable selection criteria. Are the hubs meaningfully engaged? Will it have an impact on the program? Does it align with priorities? Are the stakeholders and sponsors clearly defined? I won't read all of these, but we think they are reasonably reasonable criteria. And thank you, Ferris, for suggesting that if they do have problems connecting with the platform, that there is a helpline on the competition CD2H, which is in the chat as we speak. Thank you for that plug. That's quite helpful. Any questions about the criteria? Then let's move on. The schedule was to have closed on the 9th. Due to some of the technical challenges, this was pushed out to the 16th. The committee will review the work. We're going to eat our own dog food and review it in the competitions tool itself. That other members of the community, that being really the CTSA community, will be allowed to make comments, and we welcome comments. The committee, as I enumerated earlier, the IEC leads, the steering committee, and other representatives will meet to discuss this in late January. We'll discuss our results with the PI focus group to ensure their blessing, more or less, or their input if they have it. And we'll announce, of course, to the IEC, the full IEC, not just the IEC leads, and of course to this group, the CD2H all hands, what the selected projects are. And those teams will then meet with the admin core to figure out how to actually execute and deliver. Questions? Let's move on.
Wait, Chris,
please,
just one
Julie.
Question. I think it should be said that if you've already submitted your proposal before the extension of the deadline and you would like to revise it, that is open to you. So if you have any desire to do so, get in touch.
Ah, good point. I did not know that, Julie, but that could be quite helpful to interested members. So thank you for that input. Next slide. Heavens, I've been asking for questions all along. I was ahead of myself. So technical submission questions. Ferris has posted the the email address at Northwestern in the chat. I urge you to look at that and avail yourself of that technical support. They've been excellent so far for the problems that we have encountered. And we can address project proposal questions or collaboration opportunities here. Any questions? Then let's move on. Easier said than done, yes. Okay. So the phase 3 overview, we were just there, weren't we? Oh, I see, we'll get there, so I'll be patient.
Chris, that was the last slide. It's supposed to be a discussion at this point. If there's community members that want to reach out and have the conversation during this call about their proposals.
Ah, thank you, Connor. This is what happens when I'm asked to sub in and haven't looked at the slides myself. I thought we had a much more orchestrated view, but who's in a position to address, maybe Julie or Connor? How many proposals have we received so far?
There's one in the platform through competitions, and there's 2 more that will be going in today that I'm aware of.
Fair enough. And we have a large audience. We have 62 people. Thank you. What issues can we address for the benefit of this community? I see a technical question already from Chun Lee. Ferris, hopefully you can work that out with NIH. If Scripps isn't on there, then that's an issue with the orgs question. I'm surprised Scripps should be on there
So
because you have a CT.
I saw Scripps College, but not the Scripps Research Institute.
one thing to keep in mind in that in Common Login is that it's in alphabetical order. There's not really a good autocomplete. And so if you start typing a word that is not the first word, it's a bit of a problem. So they are working on that as far as I know. However, you might need to look at the Scripps Research Institute or similar sorts of permutations in order to get it. I don't know that it's there. I'm just saying we've had that problem with other organizations.
Yeah, yeah. I look at the list; doesn't seem like there, but we can
Okay.
work on this offline.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we do have that backup submission option if you're really unable to do it via the platform.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Like just using the like a Google account. I saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Other questions?
I think, Chris, that one of the things that Melissa was hoping happened today is that if there were people who were curious about an idea that they had and wanted to run it by the various members of the steering committee to try to get some traction on it or get clarification, that this would be a good opportunity to do that.
Agreed. Well, while you're collecting your thoughts, let me just comment. In our steering committee earlier today, we are conspiring to have an all-hands face-to-face meeting, probably in association with our EAB meeting. And is it May that we're thinking about? We don't have a date, but we're exploring this for the spring. Just for those of you that are curious, that would be an important thing to be aware of. But that doesn't take away from your opportunity. I'm just trying to give you time to think of raising questions or topics pertinent to phase 3 submissions that you might want to run by the steering committee.
Chris, one other thing we might consider here is whether or not anybody on the call today has an idea of what they'd like to see as a project proposal, but aren't really up to submitting something themselves. See if they can find volunteers to step in on that.
Fair point, David. Agreed. Heavens. There doesn't appear to be an outpouring of inquiry about potential projects from this particular group. I'm loath to keep this entire group hanging. It's been suggested that I raise questions about the data query workshop. Again, for those of you that are curious, the Next Generation Core will be having ideally another face-to-face this year in Baltimore in May. Details will be forthcoming, but we had a very successful meeting last year, and we hope to exceed that. Last year's was somewhat broadly focused. This year is going to be narrowly focused on data interoperability and information pertinent to the CTSAs and federated query. Just a thought. Alex, do you want to speak up? Talking about your implementation of the FHIR query to research data, please.
While Alex is collecting his thoughts, it was proposed anonymously to me that it might be helpful for you to run through the form questions.
Since I haven't seen them, somebody could do that on my behalf.
Yep, 1 minute. I'll pull up the competitions tool or platform.
So I'm not the person to walk through this. Julie, maybe you could do it much more authoritatively.
Since Connor is walking through it, I think he's the one sharing his screen. It would be great if he could do that.
Okay.
I'm happy to chime in, but I think he can handle it.
Yep, and I always have a delay here. Others might experience this. It does redirect, so that's what I'm waiting for.
While he's doing that, Alex, are you have you finished looking things up? Do you want to comment before we go through these questions?
Well, thank you. I was trying to find. I've had it a few days ago, and I got lost in my tabs. There's this beautiful map of the of this sort of future federated query infrastructure, where there is a FHIR query server and translators for different types of data warehouses, and so you can do a multi-data warehouse query, not just within the ACK network, but across the ACK network, the CoreNet. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Yes, we do, and that's music to my ears. Thank you. Ken Gersing and others in the federal government are working very hard to create what we're calling a common stack of software that is based on the CQL query language and, if you will, a FHIR hub as an intermediary, with the notion that many of the extant networks, such as PCORNet, Odyssey, ACT, obviously, would be able to leverage their data into a common FHIR format and be able to serve either virtually or in real time or as an export and load, and be able to achieve the dream of full federated query. The notion is that organizations like the Sentinel Network, CDC biosurveillance, obviously various and sundry CTSA queries, NCI queries, and the like, would have a common software stack and a common data rendering and representation and a common query language. And it becomes simply a matter of configuring the authentications and the authorization. Let's say if Johns Hopkins wanted to join the Sentinel network, we could configure it correspondingly through that kind of shared infrastructure. This isn't entirely a make-believe and future tense. There are prototypes and there are examples. I think the difficulty is that many of our existing EHRs would be challenged to deal with FHIR queries in real time until bulk FHIR is more mature. The alternative in the intermediary time, and what some of us are doing, are building FHIR repositories in our backyards to function potentially in a network of that nature. But the vision is clearly to articulate FHIR as a hub, either virtually or as an instantiated repository for interoperable queries across federated networks.
Yes, precisely. And so the piece within that, where the small but in my opinion important piece is is export of the data to a to a analyzable form, like for data mining, essentially for retrospective analysis. And yeah, I've been in contact with Ken Gersing, and I understand that there are prototypes being worked on. From the from from my experience with software development, I know that being worked with means there's always still gaps, and I'm just trying to figure out a non-duplicative way to either co to reach out to whoever is closest to the FHIR to tabular data export piece, and and work with them to submit a proposal, or or to submit a proposal of my own, if that piece is sort of still in the idea stage rather than in the working prototype. Because the beauty of using FHIR is you don't have to wait for the rest of the infrastructure to be done. You can build an app against the FHIR standard that anticipates the existence of the FHIR hub, and there are plenty of test hubs against which to work. So I just wanted to get some guidance about how to articulate this this proposal.
No, that's an excellent question, and it's something that is. I'm the first to admit that FHIR is not an analytic-friendly environment. One has to project data from a FHIR source or server into an analytic form. We call it a projection in our little community. Project into essentially either flat file structure that is suitable for R or SAS or something of that nature. And that conversion is a common problem that virtually all organizations confront. I would recommend two communities that you might want to approach. CD2H is attempting to coordinate this in partnership with these communities. Both of them are at HL7. There's a new a FHIR accelerator group coming up through HL7 that CD2H has catalyzed in partnership with pharma, actually. It's called Vulcan, and it is a group that is trying to coordinate the uses of FHIR for translational research writ large and clinical research. And you're quite right, a major component of that pragmatic application is the squaring, quite literally, of the data into an analytic flat file. The other, of course, is BR&R, the Biomedical Research and Regulation group at HL7. We're, again, very closely aligned with them in the context of CD2H. I think there are a number of efforts to square the data, which is the phrase I use to describe what you're characterizing. And if you want to get in touch with me after this call, I think we can connect you with the CD2H FHIR and next generation data sharing group to ensure that what you're proposing is not redundant with, I don't know off the top of my head, but I appreciate you don't want to do something that's redundant.
No, I mean, yeah, exactly. I'm sure there is I'm sure there's a gap within this, just given how huge the problem is. And I think I have the experience to do this because I was just in the finishing stages of writing a I2B2 specific projection app. And then as I learned more about this larger effort, I realized I should just take the elements of it that are translatable to this and tool it over to a FHIR backend, because why limit to one data warehouse format when this could open up the whole field.
So Tricia Francis, I'm going to ask that you put Alex Bokoff on your target list, if you wouldn't mind, to make sure we pursue this outside of this meeting.
Will do.
Thank you. Back to you, Connor.
All right, it looks like Dave has started sharing. Thank you. I had an issue with my internet, but it looks like we've logged in, and I've also been able to log in. So the platform does seem to be working. Right now we're looking at the questions, basic attributes, the title, and then project alignment. So this is what the tool looks like. There are text boxes to enter in there. Currently, there is not a function to save and come back. They are working on that, but just know that you might want to do a screenshot or log in and look at what the questions are and compose offline unless you plan to submit it in one sitting. But looking over the questions, does anyone have questions about the questions?
So from a standpoint of the community projects, it's my understanding that this was constructed to resemble the clicks kind of process, and that the support provided by CD2H to get these community projects off the ground would need to be described. So that question in the middle right there, the other resources, what central resources does this project rely on? So this could be something like the NCATS cloud resources, or consultation from CD2H partners, or it could be curation, I don't know, just some indication of what you're looking for from the CD2H side to get this to work.
Why do
Given
I
that they're,
Vanna White?
go ahead.
I said, why do I feel like Vanna White?
We just want to make sure it's super clear to everybody. So if there are any questions, now's the time. Otherwise, maybe we should adjourn.
Yeah, I'm very conscious that we're keeping 60 people occupied.
It could be that people have questions that they don't feel comfortable stating in front of 60 people. If that's the case, feel free to hop on Slack or email us with any questions, and we will deal with them one at a time.
Oh, here's a key question. Thank you, Griffin. Does CD2H resources include any direct financial support? I inserted direct editorially. Julie, do you want to answer that?
It currently does not.
See, I didn't have to say that. It does include potentially in-kind support, and that if the project is deemed, if it goes through the review process and becomes executable, then obviously CD2H can choose to allocate resources within its community to facilitate, let's say, programming tasks or implementation tasks or other kinds of tasks. We are prohibited from reallocating our CD2H money to other sites. That is considered a grant award process. We actually tried to propose that in our application, and we were informed that NIH would prefer to do the granting of funds itself. Thank you. And that CD2H, other than the challenge competitions, was not allowed to reallocate CD2H funds to other sites at this time. That's not to say that we couldn't collaborate in preliminary work that might result in a collaborative UO1 that could be run by a non-CD2H site. But I regret, Griffin, that we are not in a position right now to directly fund to another site this activity. It's through in-kind support.
So Chris, I think that's a really good answer, and I appreciate kind of the clarification on the background. This is Adam Wilcox. I'm wondering if you could walk through, because I think behind Griffin's question is something deeper about, so kind of, for lack of a better way to say this, so tell me how this would work if, suppose, Griffin submits a proposal or a phase 3 proposal that everyone deems as, wow, this has got to get done. We have the people that could do this. And it should get done. So tell me how that actually goes through, because I think it's going to be important for someone like Griffin to understand that as he's applying, to think about how it might work.
Well, obviously, since we're talking about these projects being added on to a large portfolio of ongoing work, I'm assuming it's a modest overall ask, less than an FTE total. Let me throw that out as an arbitrary number. Then we would seek funded CD2H sites who have technical capability, personnel, let's say ontologists, terminologists, programmers, database people, whatever might be appropriate to the project that is approved or accepted, to do the heavy lifting for the work. The proponent of the project can continue in a leadership role, an executive role, if they choose to donate in-kind resources to a modest extent. That obviously would be possible, but they wouldn't be reimbursed for them. They would be able to sit on the leadership of that project and in a directing role to ensure that its execution by CD2H on behalf of that project is consistent with the original vision and concept that was originally approved. I'm waving my arms here, Adam, because you're asking a hard question, but that's probably as close as I can get. Does anybody else on the steering committee want to correct me or expand on that?
Well, so I think it's fair for me to expand on it as well. And Chris, I appreciate you answering that, because I think that that was helpful in kind of describing to people like a proposal that would be submitted, what it the opportunity that creates is for CD2H to help work on that. And it probably, and you brought up a good point, where it would not be very successful without the person submitting to be involved to a degree on it, but there are limitations in terms of the distribution. I don't know that someone should feel like they need to adhere to that one FTE limit that you kind of gave as an example, but I recognize you were giving that as an example of, given that there's an ongoing body of work, that would be considered in terms of that. But I will say, if what you're proposing is deemed as more significant and more important than the ongoing body of work, then that creates an opportunity for us to redirect our efforts towards that. Because I think it really is an opportunity to hear suggestions of things that would really make a difference, that could be done, and figure out how to get those done.
Agreed.
But you phrased it really well. What it isn't is another grant proposing approach to a specific institution to get something done, but it is a prioritization of the existing efforts opportunity that should be taken seriously and would be really helpful, because that's what we're trying to do, is to serve the community that would be making these suggestions. So
there's an excellent question that's come up. What happens if you're selected? Are the resources available for the community outside of this grants project vehicle, specifically the NCATS cloud? Let's be clear, the NCATS cloud is not something that is owned and managed by CD2H. It's owned and managed by NCATS, and CD2H is a user of that. So to my knowledge, there'd be nothing to preclude a site that has a project that, let's say, is a 6-month project for CD2H that is funded and approved, or not funded, scratch that word, strike that from the record, that is approved and resourced in some fashion, and they choose to implement on the cloud environment, which is being promoted by CD2H and to some extent facilitated. Once that project is ended, that doesn't mean that they have to get off the darn cloud. It would be, if NCATS in their judgment considers it relevant to the larger community, then it can and should persist independent of any kind of CD2H resourcing. So yes, I think sites would have access to cloud resources. CD2H can be an entry point for it. I can't speak for NCATS, but I would assume that there could alternatively be other endpoints for it, such as through TIN or through collaborative UO1, through CTSA or other mechanisms. CD2H is not the exclusive entry point to those kinds of resources. I don't know if I answered the question.
Well, so Chris, this is Philip. Just to provide a really specific response to that question.
Okay.
There is a mechanism on the CD2H website right now for any CTSA hub to come and request CD2H facilitated access to the NCATS cloud environment. And there's an intake process and a mechanism to work with our cloud and tool community core. So separate from this particular project process, if you are interested in that, I strongly encourage you to go online, fill out the intake form, and we are working with a variety of groups already to help get them access to that cloud environment. So maybe we can make sure Connor afterwards to send a reminder to everybody with that specific URL from the website.
Thank you, Philip. I suspected there was something like that, but you are obviously in charge of the core, and I appreciate the clarity.
And just adding, like, I think that to extend that example a little bit, because I think the question is useful for kind of giving an example. If there was a project that one felt would be would probably involve needing more help than what Philip's team is offering regarding facilitation of the NCATS cloud and kind of using it in a significantly different way, that may be something that you would think, oh, this would be a good idea for a proposal here. It would, it would need to meet this similar criteria that we're all kind of being assessed on, how it affects the community broadly, not just for one institution. What Philip is referring, as I understand it, about the help for using the cloud, that would be, if it's just for one institution, that would be more related to that. But I think that something using the NCATS cloud and CD2H facilitation in a broader way could become a good proposal.
Yes, no argument. I see Andrew Williams' question, and it's quite critical. I apologize if I misconveyed in here. Do you have to be receiving CD2H funding to apply for this project? And the answer is no. Any lead, and I won't call them a PI because it's not a funding instrument per se, but any lead at any CTSA institution can submit a proposal. In fact, that's precisely the focus and intention of this effort, is to get participation and ideas and thoughts from the CTSA hubs. This is an engagement-focused activity, so they do not need to be receiving CD2H funding. In fact, those that are already receiving CD2H funding might be looked upon as double dipping. If we have to be careful about that. I know the sites that have PIs, like Hopkins, for example, are precluded, I believe, from submitting the community projects. But that being said, once the selection is made, that does not mean that the non-CD2H site gets funding. That's what I was trying to say. It means that the proponent of that project can lead the steering committee for that particular project and be deeply involved in the process and conduct of that project, and have some oversight over how the resources are used and tasked. But those resources would be within CD2H funded sites, even though the leadership for that is coming from a non-CD2H funded site. So Alex, I appreciate your question about data sharing and IRB support. I think that's a bit tangential to this, but hum a few bars and see if I'm being too harsh.
Well, if a proposal intends to use real data to whatever extent, then to us a pain point has always been just the time, the staff to negotiate and to negotiate IRB approval, to negotiate a data use agreement. Since the types of projects I have in mind involve not just sending aggregate data, but sending de-identified is fine, but nevertheless sharing fully like visit level granular data. This, that would be an issue, and something that would be very helpful if that was part of an in-kind support, like support the CD2H site, offering to be the IRB of record and having their staff handle the reliance paperwork and and everything like that.
Yes, I think that is possible. And for small projects that involve a modest number of sites on a specific disease or problem, that might even be scalable. And it gets into the whole issue that Melissa has been trying to lead over since she started with CD2H, which is data use agreements and having standard, if you will, templated data use agreements so that it minimizes the overhead for that. I think the more strategic direction for IRB and data sharing is going to be a federated query where the data would never leave your institution, but the query would be processed on your institution and pooled. Picori is doing this already to some extent, as is Odyssey and ACT. But I think the vision is that as we become more adept at this, and we've discussed this, we're partnering very closely with ACT. For those of you that don't know, we've had a number of meetings with ACT. We consider ACT to be a brethren community, and with the ACT members, we're exploring questions about more sophisticated federated query that instead of creating a point estimate and a variance, let's say, would create a table or a matrix of subtotals of covariates or feature characterizations, and that matrix would be returned to a central place and be conceived to be a fully de-identified effort without any identifying characteristics, but providing a more robust meta-analysis than just weighting point estimates alone. So strategically, we'd want to pursue federated query, but tactically, for the purposes of these projects, you're right. I think CD2H, if it's agreed that a limited data sharing of certain elements that are not fully de-identified because of the nature of the question, a limited data set, let's say, that would include date times because it has to, that could be facilitated by CD2H on behalf of that project. That's a legitimate use of CD2H, in my opinion.
So Chris, can I just sorry about that. So while I think that was fascinating, the information you gave there, I worry it doesn't actually represent what we're doing with data sharing and the stuff, similar to the example of cloud stuff where Philip could specifically say what they were doing regarding that one. In data sharing, that's the project I'm leading. Alex, we will reach out with you because I think that what you're suggesting there is very much in line with what we're trying to do. And I think that would be, if you have an idea for a proposal regarding that, that would be great to include because I think it is in line. What you're trying to solve is something we're trying to solve more globally as well. But we will reach out to you specifically regarding that project because that is what you're describing is in line with what we're trying to fix.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad it's finally in line with something somebody's doing because it's a lonely quest. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I look forward to the conversation.
All right. Let's see. So we have 13 minutes. The questions seem to be dwindling, but they've been good so far. Thank you. Any final questions? If not, any new business for the all hands meeting? If not, then thank you. We appreciate your participation and give you back your 12 minutes and look forward to meeting you again. Thank you.